Who are we as a people? I can't remember a time in my life where we more badly needed an answer to that question. Rediscovering American identity begins with understanding who we are as individuals. According to some, you and I are each defined by the characteristics that we inherited on the day we were born. For example, I'm a man, not a woman. I'm brown, not white. I'm straight, not gay. For proponents of this view, we are each defined by the innate and the immutable, by the visible and the superficial. This is essentialism, the idea that the characteristics we inherit at birth define who we are and what we can achieve. It's the idea that a scientist's application for an NIH grant should be judged not only on the basis of its scientific merits, but on the basis of the race or gender of its applicant. It's the idea that Ruth Bader Ginsburg's successor on the Supreme Court had to be a woman, just as Thurgood Marshall's successor on the court had to be black, irrespective of whether the successor shared anything else whatsoever in common with their predecessor. It's the idea that Joe Biden's vice president pick had to be a woman of color rather than a white woman or a black man. It's the idea that the diversity of a board of directors ought to be measured on the basis of color rather than on the basis of diversity of thought or experience. It's the idea that if you're a member of a particular race, that you are committed to a particular ideology. Summed up well last year by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who famously declared that we don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice, that we don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice. According to this philosophy, I am merely a fault line at the intersection of the tectonic plates of group identity. My status as a free agent in the world is an illusion. I'm reduced to attributes like the color of my skin, my gender, and my sexual orientation. As Congresswoman Pressley would have it, my race isn't just about my skin color. It's about my voice, my ideas, my way of thinking. When you look at me, you're expected to see not an American, but an Indian American. When I look at my neighbor, I'm expected to see not just my neighbor, but my black neighbor, and to anticipate something about his worldview and his lived experience based on his skin color. That narrative of identity is quietly becoming dominant in our country's psyche. But I reject that narrative, and I think every American bears a responsibility to soundly reject it too. I'm not just a man. I'm a proud father, I'm a loyal husband, and I'm a grateful son. I'm not just a person of color. I'm a Hindu. I'm a child of immigrants. I'm an American citizen, and I'm a native of Ohio. I'm a CEO, but I'm also a scientist and an entrepreneur. I'm an agent in the world, the author of my own destiny, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse, unconstrained by whatever limitations someone else may think that I inherited. I'm not defined by any one of those things. Rather, I'm all of those things at once, and a great deal more. Each of those identities are part of my personal mosaic, the mosaic that together comprises who I am as an American. Some people think of pluralism as getting a bunch of different looking people together in the same place and then celebrating that visible tableau of diversity. To me, that's just putting lipstick on essentialism. True pluralism isn't about celebrating the differences between us as people. True pluralism is about the diversity of identities within each of us, rich identities that go beyond the color of our skin or the number of our X chromosomes. Pluralism means rising above the siren song of woke culture to recognize that there's more to each of us than the immutable characteristics with which we're born. The fundamental problem with essentialism isn't just that it offers the wrong answer to the question of identity. The bigger problem is that it forecloses the possibility of shared solidarity. If we see each other as defined by a narrow set of attributes, the color of our skin, the content of our gender, the sex of the person we're attracted to, or even for that matter, the number of digits in our bank account, then it becomes impossibly difficult to find commonality with those who don't share those characteristics. But if we define ourselves on a plurality of attributes, the pluralism of identities within each of us, then we find our path to true solidarity. We don't have to share everything in common with one another. We only need to share a few things in common and then focus on those. I may be brown-skinned, conservative in my politics, and pray at the local Hindu temple, and my colleague at work may be white, liberal, and atheist. But we both share a passion for unlocking the mysteries of human biology, to discover new medicines for serious diseases. My neighbor may be black, progressive, and Christian, but we're each the father of children that we hope can play sports together one day, go to class together one day, and learn from one another one day. We don't need to share everything in common with one another. We only need to share those few things that bind us together. Pluralism is about embracing those separate but co-equal identities within each of us, without reducing each of ourselves to a single unidimensional attribute, like race, gender, or even a political party. Take our shared vulnerability to COVID-19 this year. Just like 9/11, the pandemic has been a national tragedy, a moment that exposed our vulnerabilities. And yet, like 9/11, it affected us whether we were male or female, black or white, gay or straight, Democrat or Republican, a common man, or the President of the United States. It should serve as a reminder that our greatest threats are not the microaggressions that one group commits against another, but rather the macroaggressions that we share as one people. Out of tragedy, we've seen many examples of shared sacrifice and patriotism. I became a father in February. It's been the greatest joy of my life, but a joy that came during a very difficult time. My wife, Apurva, is an airway specialist and faced a difficult choice this spring, whether to head to the front lines to treat patients or to stay at home to begin raising our son. Either choice would have been heroic for its own reasons. On one hand, leadership in the world begins with leadership at home. On the other hand, sometimes leadership calls for sacrifice too. And in a family, there's no such thing as a purely personal sacrifice. Ultimately, we decided that in this case, it was Apurva's duty to treat patients during her hospital's hour of need when they were short-staffed at the height of the pandemic. And it was my duty to become the principal caretaker of our son during those months. She went on to become infected in the line of duty and was separated from our family for longer than we had planned. She would have been a good doctor, even if she made the opposite choice. She was a good mother, even in making the choice that she did. I hope the same went for my choices as a father and as a CEO. American pluralism is about embracing the multitude of identities in each of us, rather than reducing ourselves to just one of them at a time. The upcoming election is another example of our shared commonality as a people. Now, that might sound surprising, since partisan divisions run deep, and the acrimony between our political leaders is painful. It reminds me of the misguided feeling that I had sometimes as a kid, saddened that my parents, in the depth of a heated argument, might get divorced, when in reality, they remain happily married to this day. But even across those partisan divisions, we share an ideal in common as Americans, that we resolve our differences through democracy, not tyranny. In less than a month, we will each cast our ballot for elected leaders in positions ranging from county commissioner to president. Whatever disagreements we might have, we are united by our commitment to participate in a free, open, and deliberative process for selecting our leaders and to live with those results whether we like them or not, knowing that we'll still have another chance to make our case in the future. And if all of that sounds obvious to you, then I am grateful, because it should be rightfully banal to all Americans, regardless of party. Just like you and me, America isn't just one thing either. And that's what makes America special. Most countries in the world, indeed most nations throughout human history, are defined on the basis of a single attribute, a single ethnicity, a single language, a single religion, a single monarch. But not America. We were the first and greatest country defined exclusively on the basis of a set of ideas. We came into being through a set of ideas that unified a polyglot, religiously divided group of people. America wasn't just a place. It was a vision of what a place can be. And the foundations for that vision were plural in nature. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, democracy, free enterprise, reason, faith, exceptionalism, the American dream. The idea that no matter where you are born or who your parents were, you can achieve your dreams with hard work, commitment, and your own ingenuity. America isn't just one of those things. It's all of them at once. I believe that part of rediscovering American identity begins with separating these identities from one another so as to preserve the integrity of each, separating capitalism from democracy, separating science from both democracy and capitalism, separating faith from science, and so on. That's part of what gives me pause about the modern fad over concepts like stakeholder capitalism, the idea that corporations shouldn't just make products and provide services, but should also address other social and cultural issues, or the influence of woke culture over our civic and community institutions. It's not that social activists don't have a point. It's just that they're often mistaken about the right way to actually drive positive change. For example, I'm a biotech CEO, charged with making new medicines for patients who desperately need them. Many of the younger employees at my company were disappointed in me earlier this year when I chose to focus on our mission of developing medicines rather than leading our company like many in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street are wont to do today, weighing in publicly on the difficult question, for example, of addressing racism in the United States. As a citizen, I care deeply about these issues and the right way to restore true equality of opportunity in America. Yet as a CEO, I care foremost about developing safe and effective medicines. And I felt that the best way for America to be the best version of itself wasn't for CEOs to solve racism and for politicians to develop cures to diseases, but to let each make their own unique contributions with integrity and humility, unpolluted by the other. The point I'm making here is that all of these things, democracy, capitalism, reason, faith, science, freedom, speech, exceptionalism, they're all quintessentially American values and American institutions, and that as Americans, we should care deeply about preserving the power of each of them. And sometimes that means even leaving each one of them alone and keeping them separate from one another. That too is part of what it means to reject essentialism and to embrace pluralism at the level of America itself. The antidote to the siren song of identity politics and tribal division in our country isn't to double down on division. We have spent so much time celebrating our differences that we have forgotten all of the ways that we are actually the same. The most important way in which we're the same is that none of us is reducible to just being one thing. We are all plural, and across that plurality, we share many fundamental values in common. The cure to our division is not to celebrate diversity between one another. It is to celebrate the diversity within each of us. That's the key to our shared identity as Americans, one that is so strong that it makes both racism and woke culture superfluous at once. One that is achievable even if we don't share every attribute or even most attributes in common with one another. I recognize that part of this message may sound aloof to many Americans who are struggling, who are suffering during this particularly difficult year. I recognize that not everyone has experienced the full arc of the American dream in the same way that I have. Rediscovering shared American identity may sound like a load of high-minded BS to a working family who's struggling to make ends meet during the current recession, or to a family member of a victim who died at the hands of excess police force, or to a small business owner who had their store raided in the name of racial justice, or to someone whose parents may have died of COVID-19 this year. I understand that. But rediscovering American identity may seem abstruse. It may seem frivolous to most people, but I still believe it's a necessary precondition for making real progress on the more tangible problems actually facing our country. And in the end, all we can do is make progress. America is imperfect, and it always will be. Indeed, America was born from the idea that perfection is impossible. Our system of checks and balances reflects an understanding that all humans are fallible and that the leaders we elect are fallible. We are not perfect, but we have never been. Yet more so than any nation in history, America is the pursuit of perfection, the pursuit of a more perfect union, the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of liberty, equality, and justice for all. Those are the values that won the American Revolution. Those are the values that reunited the nation after the Civil War. Those are the values that won us World War II and the Cold War. Those are the values that still give hope to the free world. And if we embrace those common values rather than fractious group identities, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a virus, not anyone, can defeat us. And that is what true American identity is all about. Thank you.